Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this night's town hall discussion on the impacts of the coronavirus outbreak on older Americans. This town hall is being hosted by Congressman Denny Heck, who represents Washington's 10th Congressional District. We're also very fortunate to have with us tonight two very special guests. Doug Shadel, who has served as the State Director for AARP in Washington State since 2003. And we also have on this town hall tonight, Cathy McCall, the Advocacy Director for AARP in Washington State. We've been collecting questions from you through social media and through constituent mail, and we'll use those questions to drive this discussion tonight. If you're watching this live on Facebook and have a question, please ask it in the comment section for the video. We'll try to get to some of these questions too tonight. Before we get into questions, I'm going to hand it over to the Congressman and then to Doug and then also Cathy, if you would like to do any opening remarks. So Congressman, I will hand it over to you for opening remarks.
Thank you, Emily, very much. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I think this is our 7th or 8th, maybe even 9th in the series of town hall meetings regarding impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on Americans. Tonight will be devoted, as Emily indicated, to the issues affecting older Americans, and they are substantial. By now, we all understand that older Americans are much more likely to actually die as a consequence of having the virus. Indeed, about a third of all the deaths occur in nursing homes, and over, I think, about 80% of all the deaths are people age 65 and older. So they're just much more vulnerable to the impacts of the virus on their bodies. Moreover, they suffer increased likelihood of debilitating loneliness because, as we all know, it's so important to keep social distance from those who might be especially vulnerable. And so I don't know about you, but I have countless numbers of friends who have loved ones and family members in long-term care facilities who haven't been able to hug them in months. And there is a consequence to that, of course. And in addition to that, they're also oftentimes subject to receiving fewer services because people can't not be proximate to them. And so the kinds of casual things that, for example, we may have done with as family members to pick up the groceries, to be with them, to do this task, to do that chore, we are much less able to do than before. And then fourth and final, I think, disproportionate impact on older Americans, among many, would be that they're much more likely to be the victims of exploitation by scams and fraud and the like. And those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. As Emily indicated, we have a couple of spectacular guests, both Dr. Doug Shadel and Cathy McCall from the AARP Washington State. Doug has been its director since 2003. He's extraordinarily well qualified to talk about this just by virtue of professional experience. He also has a master's degree from my college, the Evergreen State College. Good on you, Doug. Good choice. Go Gooey Ducks. And he has a doctorate as well from Tilburg University, I believe in the Netherlands somewhere. I'm not quite sure. But in any event, as it relates to protecting seniors from a consumer financial or consumer protection standpoint, he's also written not one, but 2 books on it. So enough of me talking about Doug and Cathy. Let's turn it over to them now to see if they have any opening remarks before we get into any questions that you previously submitted or are submitting live as we have this conversation. Doug.
Thank you, Congressman Heck, for that introduction. And I think you did a good job of summarizing the challenge that we face here and around the country with regard to our members, but also all older people and people with pre-existing conditions. And I just want to start out by thanking the congressperson on 2 fronts. One is every year up until this year, we trek across the United States and go meet with our members of Congress, our congressional delegation. Congressman Heck has never once failed to meet with us every single time. And I just want to thank you for that, because there's always something going on where it's never a good time, and you've always made time to meet with AARP and our volunteer leaders as we went up to the Capitol. And the second thing is just support of the support that you and Congress and members of the House have already made with the CARE Act and the provisions of that. That has been extraordinarily helpful. We, of course, want more, and I know you want more, and maybe we'll talk about that. throughout the evening. But that has been a real help to our members here. Here in Washington State, we had the misfortune or the good fortune, I can't tell which, maybe a little of both, starting with misfortune of having this huge crisis right out of the gate because we had a single nursing home, as you know, that where there was unfortunately several deaths right out of the gate. But that had a catalyzing effect for members of the leadership here, from the governor down to the King County executive, to the mayor's office, and to all of the community partners and our partners to come together right away and take this seriously right away. And that for a period of time, and Cathy can, share this with you, we had trouble convincing our own organization at first that this was really a crisis because it was so early in Washington State. But I am just so proud of the members of the congressional delegation here and also the leaders for coming together as they did in this horrible crisis. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. Cathy, you want to say a few things?
I just would reiterate what Doug had said is that, really, I think there's been really great leadership in the state, from the governor's office to DSHS to the Department of Health to the public health districts across the state and our congressional delegation looking at federal policy and making sure we can get resources into the state, and targeting and being specific about the needs of seniors. This virus is very specific, and it wants to attack people who are older and who are medically vulnerable. And so we take this very seriously, and I'm just proud to be working for an organization that's really on the front lines of advocating and creating change in this state.
Thank you both for that. I wanted to make an observation about the measures that our state leadership, specifically Governor Inslee and those who work with him, have taken. And I want to acknowledge that there's an awful lot of pain and suffering out there beyond the public health crisis and the sickness and the death, and that is in the economic dislocation. And we can't discount that for 1 second. In fact, we all know now that if you count unemployment in the broader index, which we technically call U6, we are rivaling unemployment levels of the Great Depression. So there is a lot of different kinds of pain and suffering. That said, the measures the governor has taken has literally saved lives. And we're not talking a few, we're talking thousands. I like to point out to the comparison with New Jersey. Now, there are a lot of different variables that feed into this, but as an example, Washington State has had about 1,000 deaths specifically associated with the coronavirus, COVID-19. New Jersey is 12 to 15% larger than Washington State. Again, a lot of different variables. And I believe the last time I checked, they were closing in on 10,000 deaths. So it is a direct result of those strong measures of social distancing that the governor has taken that has saved thousands and thousands of lives, quite literally. Again, I want to acknowledge that there is a lot of different kinds of pain and suffering going on out there, and most notably among older Washingtonians. Emily, questions?
Yes, so we will start out with our first question, which comes from Twitter. So this person doesn't have a name, but their username is 11demo11. And they ask, are there any assurances that Social Security is safe? Congressman, I'll let you have a first go at that question, and then we can turn it over to Doug and Cathy.
Well, yes, I do believe it is. In fact, I believe April report of the commission indicated that Social Security was fiscally solvent until about the year 2035. Now, having said that, that report was predicated on data that did not include the most recent downturn, which of course will significantly reduce the amount of taxes paid into Social Security, at least for some period of time. But we've got a pretty good run ahead of us. We do have a need to improve the system so that it is viable and solvent beyond 2035. So it turns out I'm a proud sponsor of the Social Security 2100 Act, which would in fact stabilize the Social Security system and even increase benefits for those of lesser means and create solvency to the year 2100. That's why it's called that. It's under serious consideration, and at some point, Congress will be compelled to take up the fiscal health of the Social Security system. But I know that there are a lot of people, and ironically, a lot of younger people, who simply don't believe that Social Security will be there for them I absolutely believe Social Security will be there for them. And I'll tell you why, because it needs to be. If you remove Social Security income from older Americans, the poverty rate would increase from approximately 10% to just under 50%. And taking a chance and playing roulette by subjecting older Americans' retirement income strictly on the whims of the stock market is a spectacularly bad idea. I believe that there is no Congress in any reasonable likelihood that would seriously consider doing away with or substantially diminishing Social Security. In fact, I think the next step is likely to be an increase in benefits for Social Security recipients. But it's a good question. I want to put your mind at rest for the short term, and every reason to be optimistic over the longer term.
Great. Doug or Cathy, do you have anything to add to that about Social Security?
I don't know. I've seen internal memos that say that exact same thing at AARP. I agree with everything that Congressman Heck said. One thing I'd like to intersperse in here, though, is in this pandemic time we're in, there's a lot of misinformation out there going on. And I don't pretend to be an expert on all the misinformation, but rumors like Social Security is going broke or the IRS is going to come and get you and all that is just, there's a lot of that out there. And one way you can cut through it is if even if you're not getting Social Security, I really strongly advise you to create an electronic relationship with the Social Security Administration. One of the things that identity thieves do is they, if they get a hold of your identity, they could create their own relationship with Social Security Administration. And so you need, one of the first things I did when I learned about this is I went on to the website, the Social Security website, and created an account and with a passcode and everything. And I go in there about once a month and just check my account. And there's a lot of good information in there. It can dispel any kind of myths you might have seen online about Social Security is going broke or some other kind of nefarious thing that you might be getting in the way of a communication. And it also prevents identity thieves from creating their own relationship with them in your name, which unfortunately has been going on too much.
Great, thank you. Moving on to our next question. Karen from Facebook asks, are there funds from the CARES Act to pay for respite care for families caring for disabled or medically fragile family members at home? How about Doug? Would you like to answer that one? And then the Congressman can add on top of that.
Why don't we have Cathy answer that? I think she's more on top of it than I am.
There is substantial funding that was in the CARES Act for respite care and specifically for family caregivers. And that money was put towards the area agencies on aging. And we have a wonderful area agency on aging in Lewis, Thurston, and Mason County that does fantastic work. And so there's additional funding for respite care for caregivers. There's also additional funding for extending services to families that might find themselves now in the situation where they need to care for a loved one.
Great,
I really
Congressman.
don't have much. There's not much to add to that, Cathy. Thank you very much. I think the actual increase in funding for Older Americans Act was just under $1 billion for a variety of different purposes, including the one that the questioner specifically asked about. So yes, there is more. And in fact, in the bill that we just passed out of the House, which has not yet become law, not yet been taken up by the Senate, the HEROES Act, there is yet again additional money for purposes of serving older Americans. Less, I think it's about 100 million.
And what's so important about respite care is in this state is we really rely on home and community-based services. And we rely on 880,000 caregivers in the state that provide unconditional care for individuals, whether they be older or people with disabilities. And we want to make sure that they have the ability to have that respite, especially during this crisis.
Thank you, Cathy. Next question, where can I find out why I haven't received any stimulus funds? So that comes from Linda. She is watching live on Facebook. Congressman?
So Linda, the last that we were informed, the stimulus checks were going to go out through mid-June. And so the fact that you haven't received it yet, I don't think it all means that you're not going to. Rather than make a guess at this, I would suggest that you follow up tomorrow and call our office. And I'm pretty sure that Emily there can give out that phone number within the length of this program. There may be a website that you can go to and type in your name, and Dr. Shidell, I'm turning it over to you. This is for the $1,200, Doug.
Okay, I'll take IRS for 1,200.
Okay.
This question.
That's what I was going to say, but I wasn't 100% sure, and I didn't want to stick my foot in my mouth. So take it away, sir.
Well, the only reason I know this, Congressman, is because in the teletown halls we've done, we've had this come up a couple times. You go to irs.gov. If you're wondering about your stimulus payment check, you can go to irs.gov, and you can click on Get My Payment. There's just a big sort of radio button that says Get My Payment, and it will walk you through how to check where your check is. And that's the best way to do it. And I guess, not to have everything be about consumer scams, but this is one of the most common ones too, is people calling you and saying, we've got your check, give us your account number. Don't respond to anything coming at you in any regard like that. If you initiate the contact, this is why I think it's so great to have sessions like this with the Congressman, because you initiate the contact. So go to irs.gov, click on Get My Payment, and you can find out the status of your stimulus check.
Thank you, Dave.
Great. And going along with that, we're actually getting a lot of frequently asked questions about the stimulus check, and especially for people who receive Social Security retirement benefits or survivors benefits, supplemental security income, railroad retirement benefits, or Veterans Affairs benefits. So I wanted to ask some of the frequently asked questions we're getting on that topic. So when will these people get their payment, and will they receive it automatically? Doug, do you have anything to share on that?
When will who get which payment? I wasn't following that entirely. You listed all the different variables there.
Yeah, so if someone receives Social Security retirement or any of these other programs, and if they're not required to file their taxes each year, when will they receive their payment, and will they receive it automatically?
Boy, I don't know. I would still just go back to that website to check individually without making generalizations about individual cases. Anybody who is going to be owed a check can go to that site and check on the status of their check. So I think that would be, I don't know, Cathy, do you have anything
Unless
else?
it's under an individual pension plan, I would say contact that pension plan directly. But as Doug was saying, if somebody approaches you about your pension, don't respond to them. Initiate the contact yourself.
I believe that the checks are for those categories supposed to be automatically received and not applied for. Actually, Emily, I think that was an issue that we had in one of the earlier iterations of the CARES Act that we were able to take care of. But again, as Doug suggests, the easiest way to find out the status is to go to the IRS site and get the information. I do not believe the IRS will ever call you regarding this subject. Anybody calling you that tells you it's about this subject and represents themselves as being from the IRS is lying to you. Be very careful. Amber light glowing, red flag being waved, and extreme caution. If they're calling you about your back taxes, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Great. Moving on to the next question. This comes from Dave, and Dave is watching live on Facebook. And Dave says, seniors are quite susceptible to fraud. My question is, with the misinformation and the borderline lies on coronavirus coming from national leadership, how is AARP helping older Americans keep informed on the fact and not be wooed by misinformation?
You want me to answer that? We have this thing called the Fraud Watch Network, and you can go to the AARP.org site and type in Fraud Watch Network, and you will find all kinds of examples of all the various scams, the coronavirus scams that are going on. And it isn't just AARP. The Federal Trade Commission is doing a great job with this. Attorney General Bob Ferguson locally has a robust enforcement program right now where he's getting people who are doing price gouging and all, they're really on this. So there's a wealth of information about the types of scams that are out there. You can go onto our website and actually listen to the types of calls that are coming in through robocalls. And the main rule of thumb here is, we for years have studied why people are vulnerable to these scams. And one sort of uber reason is that they get into a heightened emotional state. They're in some kind of a desperate state that makes them think less clearly. Well, the entire country is in that state now. I mean, if the con man's goal is to get you into a heightened emotional state, half of his job is already done with the entire country. And so you really just have to make sure that you don't act out of some form of desperation, of concern about the cures. I've been listening to calls the last couple of weeks where people are offering everything from I've got your stimulus check to I've got a free testing kit to I've got the vaccine that will cure you of this. And again, the best thing to do is to just not respond to any of that incoming. If you have any questions, you can call. Can I give out our number? We have a helpline that I'd love people to call if they have any questions about this. Is that okay?
Please do, Doug.
Is that okay to do? Fraud Watch Network helpline is 877-908-3360. And we actually have trained volunteers who will take your call.
877.
And if you have any concerns about the kind of calls you're getting, or if you are concerned about a loved one who you think might be victimized in this way, you can call there and they'll give you advice about where to go.
Great. And I will also take this opportunity to plug our district offices. So we have caseworkers who work if a constituent is having an issue with a federal agency, they work to get in touch with that agency and fix that or answer those questions. So our Lacey office number is 360-459-8514. And our Pierce County office number is 253-533-8332. And in addition to those phone numbers, we also have a website, and you can email us any questions there. That's at dennyheck.house.gov. So moving on to the next question, this is on retirement income. So, and it comes from Kelly, and she wrote in via constituent mail. And Kelly says, as a constituent of yours, I am in desperate financial circumstances due to the stay-at-home order. I will be 59 and a half in a few months, but I need income from my retirement plan now. Please do what you can to put a temporary suspension on the 10% penalty for early withdrawal so that I and thousands of others can survive during this pandemic. Congressman or Doug, or let's give this to the Congressman first, and then we can move to Doug.
Well, good news. The CARES Act waived the 10% withdrawal penalty. You will continue, however, Kelly, to be responsible for income taxes on those withdrawal, but there's even good news in that regard, in that the law provides for you to have 3 years to pay it back. And I believe there's a limit of $100,000 on that. But the withdrawal penalty was in fact waived.
Yep.
Great. Doug, do you have anything to add?
Nope, that's goodness that better.
Great. And I do want to take a 1 second. Mccall is watching this live, and she commented in the comments that the Lewis Mason Thurston Area Agency on Aging can also be reached at 1-888-545-0910. So just wanted to.
Who was that?
That is the Lewis Mason Thurston Area Agency on Agency. Oh, Mccall is her name.
Mccall. Well, my guess is that Mccall is attached to the Area Agency on Aging.
He's the
Mccall,
director.
Yes, thank you very much for the outstanding work you do with older Americans in Southwest Washington. It is just nothing short of superb, and we're all very grateful. As an older American myself, I'm particularly grateful.
Great. Moving on to the next question. So this is from Anne, and she wrote in via constituent mail. And she writes, apparently federal employees can pick and choose whether to protect my safety as an over 60, a high-risk traveler. I was aghast this morning when I went through CTAC and saw that 80% of all TSA staff had zero PPE, no masks or gloves. And Anne says that she ended a career at the city of Olympia where they were upholding the guidance of the CDC. So Congressman, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I share her concern for that. Anne, thank you very much for your service to the city of Olympia, of which I am a resident. So as a taxpayer, thank you for your service. The fact is that employees at the airport should abide by the same guidelines and recommendations that they ask of us travelers, and that includes the personal protective equipment. Now, it is true that in the past that there has been some shortage. We have provided additional money specifically for this case, and we should acknowledge that there have been over 500 cases of TSA employees with the virus and 6 deaths nationally among those who serve in that capacity. But you're right; those are the guidelines, and they should adhere to them.
Great. Moving on to our next question. This is from Lloyd, who's watching live on Facebook. He says, "Hi, Denny, this is Lloyd Homan, and I would like to comment on our preparedness to response to communicable diseases. As a biology student in college many years ago, we were studying viruses and other diseases in our genetics class, and we knew a lot about them then. I'm amazed that 50 years later, we do not have a playbook for a cohesive response to different types of diseases. It seems like there's a disjointed patchwork of communication and processes that in relation to the trillions of dollars spent on medicine and research every year, things have not improved much." I don't believe he asked a question in this, but Congressman, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Emily. And by the way, Lloyd, hi. Lloyd is an old friend of mine. I haven't talked to him in years, but it's nice of you to tune in. The sad truth of the matter is, Lloyd, we did have a playbook and it was discarded. The sad fact of the matter is that there was a specific set of recommendations that was left to this administration about step by step what they should do in the instance of the pandemic. Now, the truth of the matter is, you're never really quite prepared for something that's never really happened before. We've had global health outbreaks before, never anything quite of this nature. But the reality is that the United States is not responding as well as it should. If you look at the per capita number of people who have become infected or the per capita number of those who have died, unfortunately, we are a considerable leader in this regard. What should have happened, frankly, is that playbook should have been utilized, and that the team that was set up that the president inherited should have been kept in place, and that the president should have immediately triggered the Defense Production Act that would have enabled him to mobilize America's great and innovative and strong manufacturing might to create the personal protective equipment and get to work early and in a coordinated way on both therapies and on vaccines. That didn't happen, and it's been left to some very real degree to the 50 governors who have taken, in some instances, 50 different approaches. I would say, however, that we are making progress. We talk weekly with Governor Inslee. In fact, we had our phone call with Governor Inslee just this morning, and we can see some light at the end of the tunnel. I'm not going to get exaggerated in my characterization because we have a long way to go, but the testing supplies are beginning to come in. Slowly but surely from disparate sources. I do not personally believe that the states and the localities and the public health departments should have been subjected to a bidding war for those things. I think it should have been coordinated and allocated on the basis of need and strategically. But we are where we are, and we're taking steps forward. And I assure you that we are going to get to the other side of this. You know, after 70 days in isolation and sheltering in place, it sometimes feels as though this is never going away. Is this my life forever? It's hard to see that there will come a day when there will be, in some regards, a return to normalcy. Now, some parts of our economy are probably restructured on a permanent basis, and I don't want to minimize that. But social distancing will be less someday. The opportunity, apropos to this specific conversation, to go visit grandma and grandpa in their long-term care facility and wrap your arms around them and give them a hug and tell you love them. That will be back someday.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question, I'm actually going to run through some frequently asked questions that we're getting and ask them to Doug and Cathy. So first, how can older Americans stay healthy during this time? And then also, do you have any advice for older Americans who are feeling socially isolated during this tough time?
Well, let me start, and Cathy, feel free to jump in here. This has been sort of the subject of a lot of the teletown halls we've been doing, and we did a program with the governor's office called Spread the Facts, in which we brought in a lot of public health officials and answered a lot of people's questions. And people are afraid, and they're just thirsty for information. So this is another great reason why, Congressman Heck, I really appreciate you doing this and letting us talk about it. There are some really good, solid sources of information that you can go to. We've mentioned some of them. Another one I want to mention is the coronavirus helpline, which the state of Washington has. It's the Department of Health. I'll give you that number at 800-525-0127. 800-525-0127. They have all the latest health information available. And the other thing I want to reiterate is the question of social isolation is a real scary thing to us, because AARP, we have done research ourselves. There's plenty of research out there that shows that socially isolating yourself can be as bad as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day in terms of the deleterious health effects of that. And so we have been trying we have this Friendly Voices program, and if you go to aarp.org, you can look that up. We have, I think what it is now, Cathy, 1,000 volunteers nationwide who have volunteered to make phone calls to people, talk to people on the phone. There are other programs like that at the local AAA level, trying to connect people and encouraging people to connect with their family members. The silver lining of this is we've heard a lot of really positive stories about families reconnecting with family members that they hadn't talked to in a long time. And I've done that myself. I've called people, cousins and uncles that I hadn't talked to in a long time. And I'm not sure, I don't know why I called them. I guess it's because we were just sitting here at home, with not as much quite to do as we had before. Cathy, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say the Friendly Voices program is great. You call the phone number, you can go on the aarp.org website, and basically sign up, and someone will give you a phone call. We've trained up a whole group of volunteers. They'll call you just to chat. We know that there's a lot of people, other family members are busy, friends, just feeling a need to talk to someone. And so we set this program up, and it's just a huge asset. Doug mentioned the Spread the Facts here in Washington State. You can watch every Thursday at 6 p.m. on TVW. And if you go to tvw.org, TVW, for those of you who don't know, it's like our C-SPAN, it's our public access television.
And I wonder who thought of that.
Yeah, I wonder who did.
Who was it who thought of that at first?
So you can go on every Thursday night at 6 p.m. and watch Spread the Facts. And we had Trudy Inslee on, and she talked about her grandkids and gardening and, just looking for those opportunities to, connect out in the community. AARP is also hosting a series of other teletown halls. This one on Thursday includes one of my favorites when I used to watch soap operas before children. She was on All My Children. Susan Lucci is on our teletown hall talking about caring for her 103-year-old mother. And so, and the caregiving challenges, and she's written a book, but Susan Lucci, and for all you soap opera fans, with All My Children, she's on again this May 25th, and it's at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's just kind of fun. And we have a whole series of those every Thursday for you to listen. And again, we try to have some fun guest speakers. We had Ty Pennington, who's the do-it-yourself home remodeler person, talking about things you can do around your house to during this time to keep you busy and occupied. And it's just connecting with others. The other thing I love, we work with a ton of volunteers here in Washington State. We have a ton of incredible AARP volunteers. but they're, a little concerned about this technology, but it's been so fantastic to have, how many people were on that last call, like 40 or 50 people, Doug?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And all using Zoom. They had never used Zoom or any of the other platforms
Yeah.
for connecting. And now that's all they want to do. When I ask them to do a phone call, they don't want to do phone calls. They're like, well, I want to do a Zoom meeting. They want to see it. So just to embrace those technologies as well with your friends and family.
I want to make a observation, if I may, about the flip side to the isolation issue. Because to be sure, isolation has a debilitating health effect, as Doug points out, for the person who is isolated. They can't be comforted. You can't hold their hand. You can't assure them. You can't do whatever it is you may have done with them regularly, whether it's read to them or bring them things, keep them company. But the other side of that coin too is for the survivors, for the people who can't hug their grandmother, or in our case, haven't hugged my granddaughter in several months, which for those who know me know is the worst form of torture possible to me. And especially in the instance when somebody passes. The idea of not being able to have said goodbye in any way, shape, or form, however one does that, is itself going to have an effect on the person. And as we know, this great ritual of our culture to collectively grieve at a funeral service or a memorial service for most people is a part of the healing process. And we're partially or largely being denied that. So there are consequences to this terrible virus that is afflicting us, and sometimes they aren't so obvious. And just about everybody's going to be affected by this before it's over. We're going to pass the 100,000 deaths mark here, probably by the weekend would be my guess, but sometime thereabouts, who have suffered from this, way more than any flu season, even a bad flu season. And every family's going to be impacted. Truth in packaging here. I lost my aunt 2 weeks ago to this disease. She was the sole surviving Heck of her generation. My father was one of 7, the oldest of 7. She was the youngest. Her older 6 brothers had all passed, and she passed 2 weeks ago to this. Now, she was nearly 94, and she had had other health issues for some time. But still, we are losing our grandfather, our grandmother, our parents, and our aunts and our uncles in fairly unprecedented numbers.
Yeah, thank you for those sobering words. Moving on, we have a live question from Ruby. And Ruby asks, what, if anything, will be done on rent hikes on apartment dwellings this year? Congressman, would you like to take that one?
Well, thank you, Ruby, very much for the question. So when we passed the HEROES Act last week, I had 2 predominant priorities. The first was to provide substantial aid to local and state governments, both of which have had their revenues fall off the table, and therefore their ability to provide police and fire and services to the most vulnerable among us. And I'm quite pleased that the bill included nearly $1 trillion to do just that, to buffer the impact to local and state governments. But the second priority was to provide rental assistance to tenants. We have mortgage forbearance in the earlier bill if your mortgage was held by one of the government-sponsored enterprises like Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae, but we didn't provide anything to the tenants. This bill incorporated a separate bill that I had introduced. The HEROES Act incorporated a separate bill that I had introduced that provides $100 billion, B with a B, a lot of money to help literally millions of people be able to make that rent check at the first of the month. Now, there was no rent control or limitation put on it, but the fact of the matter is that we are, if this bill becomes law, going to be helping out a lot of people who frankly are very vulnerable and very at risk of becoming homeless.
Doug or Cathy, do you have anything to add on to the rent piece of this?
I don't think so. Cathy?
Not specifically to the rent, but the other important provision within the HEROES Act is around food assistance and adjusting the minimum and the maximum on the SNAP, the supplemental nutrition food program, because we know, housing, food, caring for your family, all of that goes hand in hand. And we want to make sure that there is additional relief, especially to seniors who often don't receive adequate benefits under the SNAP program.
Thanks, Cathy. And while we're on the subject of the HEROES Act, Congressman, why don't I direct this question to you? So Patty from Facebook, she says that Congress has already spent too much money on everything, money that does not exist. It is all borrowed, not in the name of Congress, but in the name of U.S. citizens. We are over 22 trillion in debt. Our national credit card actually exceeds our national GNP, which is basically our national income. Nobody, not even a country, can accumulate this much debt and continue to overspend its resources without end. Congressman, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you, Patty. I would agree that no nation can do this on end or in an unending fashion. But the fact is we have done it before. A comparable time would be during World War II. And I would argue to you that we are at war. We're at war with this virus. And we have to defeat the virus in order to be able to resurrect our economy and to rebuild our economy. I'm a Keynesian, Patty, with all due respect, which means that I think it's the federal government's responsibility to spend money in times of crisis. In fact, the old expression, break glass in case of emergency, this is an emergency. And I actually happen to believe that there is vast collective wealth in the United States of America, the greatest country on earth. And I think we do have the financial wherewithal to weather this. And I do think, in fact, frankly, to bridge ourselves to that day when our economy can begin growing again and we can begin putting people back to work without fear that we will have a second wave, even worse than the first wave, then we should and can spend the resources to save small businesses and to help individuals who are at risk of being foreclosed on their home or becoming homeless because they can't make their rent check. Break glass in case of emergency. We have unemployment levels, again, if you use the broader measure, rivaling that of the Great Depression. And the only question to us is, how high will those unemployment rates go and how long will this go on? I understand your concern that, frankly, that we cannot run deficits of this size forever. But frankly, I kind of agree with half of it. It's why I voted against the massive giveaway tax cut of 3 years ago now, approximately, where 83% of those benefits went to the top 1% in this country. If we had that money today, we would be spending, we would be having much less of a deficit increasing activity now. So I understand the concern about deficits. I do think that there are times when having deficits is not only the morally right thing to do to help people, but it is the financially and economically smart thing to do.
Thank you, Congressman. So we have another question from Ruby, who's watching this live. She asks, are AARP volunteers still assisting senior citizens since the tax date was moved to the 15th of July, 2020? Doug or Cathy, can you speak to that?
Yeah, we have a tax aid program. It's the biggest volunteer program we have. Washington State has over 1,000 volunteers who do people's taxes. They do over, I think, something like 55 or 60,000 taxes for free each year. We had to shut the program down in early March because of the coronavirus. I mean, obviously they were going into senior centers and touching each other's documents and so forth. So in an abundance of caution, we shut that down early. And we are trying to figure out ways to finish tax returns that were started by tax aid volunteers, maybe have some kind of a teletax system. We haven't really decided exactly how that's going to work yet, but it's in conjunction with the Internal Revenue Service, trying to keep those services viable. The primary concern for me all along has been the safety of the volunteers, first and foremost, and the safety of the staff. And so in an abundance of caution, we shut the program down.
Thanks for that information, Doug. The next question comes from James, and James wrote to us via constituent mail. James says, as a retired person, one of my concerns with the economic changes, the stock market, With the sudden market drop, I was forced to make a large withdrawal from my IRA to protect my future. Now I face a large tax liability on that withdrawal. This unexpected change to our plans is at quite a cost and a threat to our future. What would help would be a one-time tax forgiveness on the IRAs, or at least a reduced percentage of the tax. So Congressman, would you like to take that question?
James, thanks very much for that question. As I indicated earlier, what we have done thus far, the step that has been taken was to waive the penalty and to allow for 3-year repayment of that tax. But I specifically recall something along the lines that you suggest being discussed in the earlier conversations about where to go to. I appreciate the idea. We'll take it into consideration. As I have indicated before, not just through the bill that we just passed out of the House, the HEROES Act, yet to be taken up by the Senate. The fact of the matter is that I think there will be additional mid-course corrections taken by the federal government in order to deal with this pandemic. And so that idea needs to go into the meat grinder, as I call it, namely the conversation about where we go next. And I appreciate the idea very much. Thank you, James.
Great. Next question comes from Bill, who's watching live. Bill says, why can't we tell the banks to take a moratorium on loan payments? That would take care of a significant number of people's monthly needs. Congressman, do you have a comment on that?
So there is mortgage forbearance for homeowners whose mortgage is ultimately held by one of the government-sponsored enterprises, which the huge majority of mortgages are eventually Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or similar entities within the federal government. Sometimes it's hard to figure out who that is if you've got a mortgage servicer to know where that paper actually ends up. But I believe there's also a website where you can go and track that down. Again, Emily, later, please give out the phone numbers again. Give a call tomorrow and we'll give you that website. Unfortunately, I don't know it off the top of my head. So there is an opportunity to do that. The HEROES Act also had something in it relating to those who hold mortgages outside the government-sponsored enterprises, but I frankly don't remember the details. Again, I would invite you to call tomorrow to find out.
Great. We can definitely follow up with you, Bill. Next question comes from Michael. And Michael asks, is the CARES Act a total in lieu of for emergency programs under federal FEMA declarations? So Michael previously wrote on the Facebook Live comments about the individual assistance for the crisis counseling program in the state of Washington. Doug, do you have any thoughts on this or any experience with this?
Is he talking about a particular program?
He's talking about the FEMA Individual Assistance Crisis Counseling Program.
I'm not familiar with that. Cathy,
Okay.
do you have anything?
You're muted, Cathy.
I was trying to get my four-legged furry friend off the phone. I'm not familiar with the FEMA program, but there are several emergency programs that are under DSHS. And there's a lot of resources that you can tap into through them as well. And I don't know exactly what aspect that you're looking at, but there were several waivers granted to the state by CMS and by the federal government in order to get assistance into a lot of programs in terms of crisis and emergency management. I just have not heard specifically about a FEMA program.
Okay, we will move on then. Next question is from Melissa from Constituent Mail. Melissa writes, I am almost 59 years old and recently closed my small personal training / massage therapy business due to COVID-19. I'm uncertain whether I'll be able to reopen on a sustainable level. Being almost 59, it will likely be very difficult for me to find another job. Is it possible that a future stimulus package could include some level of Social Security contribution that can take into consideration older displaced workers? Congressman, would you like to have a first go at this question?
Well, yes, of course it's possible. Whether or not it'll happen, Melissa, not entirely clear to me at this point, but I do want you to know that the HEROES Act, again, yet to be taken up, but I think it will be, extended the period of time for which the unemployment is available to you. And as a massage therapist, you are in all likelihood available for the pandemic unemployment assistance, which is the new parallel program to unemployment. And as you know, for a period of time, I think through July 31st, added $600 per week to the otherwise calculated minimum benefit. And I think that's going to be extended at some point and in some fashion. Originally, we added 13 weeks to the 26 weeks that normally a person is eligible for unemployment. But if my projection is correct, I hope it's not, but I fear it is, our unemployment levels are going to remain pretty high for quite some time. I don't think they're going to remain at this level, but it's not going to be, as every well-regarded economist has now suggested, what we call a V-shaped recession, where you hit the bottom and you bounce back up quickly. I think it's going to be more like this. We go down and then we very slowly go back up. And it's going to require some effort, some targeted assistance on the part of the federal government to help that growth go in an upward direction. And oh, by the way, one of our principal ideas or operating premises as it relates to that and as it relates to your circumstance is that one of the most effective ways we can help grow the economy back is to get assistance into the hands of individuals. After all, we're an economy built on 70% consumer activity. And if you want the economy to function well, it's important that individuals be made as whole or as healthy as is possible. So whether or not the assistance is in that form or another form that seeks to grant assistance to individuals, that's what we will be trying to do going forward and for as long as it takes until we can get past this.
Great. Doug or Cathy, do you have any advice for someone who's in her situation, or would you like me to move on?
Well, just to say that AARP recognizes the unique challenges of especially business owners that are older, and the challenges that of not being able to afford retirement, loving your business, loving what you do, and we're trying to factor in considerations for those small businesses and employees to make sure that as it becomes safe and as we move through these phases, that targeted assistance is being focused in on this older population and not just individuals that are in their 20s and 30s. And so AARP looks at every single piece of policy to understand how we can strengthen it and improve it to actually meet the needs of an aging population.
Great, thanks, Cathy. And I think this will be the last question of tonight. So just a generic question to Doug and Cathy, since you guys are experts on this, but what can people do to avoid pandemic scams? And what should they be looking out for?
I think the biggest thing we mentioned earlier is everyone is in a heightened state of anxiety as a result of the pandemic. And unfortunately, that is a recipe for making mistakes, suboptimal business decisions, if you will, what academics call it. And so to just be extra cautious, take your time, don't act out of desperation, don't respond to whether it's a pop-up on your computer that says that they've got a free test. I told the story on one of the teletown halls that early on I was having trouble finding masks. I was doing a lot of Google searching for masks, and all of a sudden on Facebook, I see all these vendors I've never heard of before offering me masks at various prices. And I almost went for it because I was desperate to get a mask. Just pay attention to that desperation, because that really does make you vulnerable. And if you have any concerns, especially about health, I think we have just starting to see the medical quackery aspect of this with all kinds of crazy solutions and vaccines. Consult with your doctor before you do anything in the way of taking medicine, regardless of what you might see on television about what you might want to take. Consult with a physician before you put anything in your body about this. Cathy?
At least from my perspective, I had kind of some firsthand experience on this on Friday, I called Doug and I asked him if there was something I needed to know about my employment status, because I had received a call from our HR department at AARP saying that they had an unemployment claim from me, and wanted to know why I hadn't submitted my resignation letter. So this can happen to anyone. There are a lot of nefarious bad actors out there wanting to take money. And the best defense against that is to be aware and alert, and not fall into a panic mode, and not, not perceive a situation as something that you can't manage. And so with this unemployment, I immediately knew, call the Employment Security Department. I also called my local sheriff's office to file a police report so that I could have that police report number to report to the credit bureau, the credit reporting agencies. I pulled my credit report, checked that. I also contacted the FTC to also alert them about it. But there's thousands of people in the state that are also falling victim to this false claims scam. So just be vigilant. Again, there's great resources, AARP, the Fraud Watch Network. We send out regular updates about the scams and fraud that we've heard about, but it's also a system where we want to hear from you as well about what are the scams that you're seeing, so that we can share those with other people across the country.
Great. Thank you, Cathy. And so sorry to hear that that happened to you, but I'm glad that sounds like you are on top of it. So before I close this out and throw it over to the Congressman for some closing remarks, I do want to mention that we have 3 future town halls scheduled. So the next one is going to be this Thursday, May 21st, with Chris Reichdahl, who is from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. Then the next town hall will be next Wednesday, May 27th, with head Fred Hutch scientist and Twitter phenom Trevor Bedford. And then the last town hall that we have scheduled, although I'm sure there will be more after this, is Tuesday, June 2nd with Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson. So we hope you will join us for those and bring your questions to us. Also, I'm hearing from our staff that it is Older Americans Month this month. So, this town hall comes at a good time, and I think it gives us some food for thought going forward. Congressman, would you like to add some closing remarks?
What time is our town hall with Chris, Emily?
The time is not on here. I believe it's at 5 p.m. Let me check real quick.
This Thursday, day after tomorrow. That, of course, will be about schools. Obviously, Chris Reichdahl is from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction because he is the Superintendent of Public Instruction, a statewide elected official. And I believe, frankly, that this proposition of how is it that we're going to deal with restarting schools and on what basis, along with the issue of how is it that we're going to be able to provide adequate childcare, is fundamental, kind of the linchpin to our ability to get this economy going again. And on what basis can we do that and be safe and healthy? So I'm looking forward personally very much to having the conversation with Chris. And Doug and Cathy, I want to extend my gratitude to both of you very, very much for lending your time and your very considerable expertise. And for all of those of you out there who tuned in, as I like to say, thank you for sharing with us your most precious commodity, that is your time. And we hope to see you in a couple of days with Chris Reichdahl. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great. And that concludes our town hall with Washington State's AARP team. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.